Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're glad you're here for another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I'm Ed, and I'm here with Lyndsay, and Josh is behind the scenes as our producer, doing amazing work. We're so grateful for him. Mm-hmm. Lyndsay, do you know what number this is being recorded?
Now you're putting me on the spot.
I am putting you on the spot.
Something in the 70s, I think.
Okay, we're 70-something. All right. Well, we're just really glad.
You're close to 70s. I'm in my 20s.
Oh, thanks a lot. I'm getting closer every day. But no, we're really glad you guys are all here to join us because I know we have covered so much ground. I mean, there's so many podcasts that are out there, but we just pray that every one of these is going to be really beneficial for people listening. Mm-hmm. And so this one's a little different because I just came back from a pastor's conference that there were about 400 people from all around the state of Michigan and workers in the church and pastors in the church. And I just had a chance to really talk to a lot of different people about a lot of different things, find out how they're doing. And it's interesting, Lyndsay, because I think I found a lot of fear. Mm. And I'm not really sure what to make of it, but I was finding a lot of people not really sure what to do. And so almost because they don't know what to do, they're not doing anything. And they're just sitting back and waiting, and I'm not really sure what they're waiting for.
Was this based off of like conversations related to the podcast, or like how did these conversations come up that led you to believe that there was fear?
I think as I would either have breakfast with them or have a meal with them and just say, hey, tell me what's going on, or what's going on in your world, or what's going on in the church, and what's new. Mm-hmm. That was an interesting question. So what's new in the last 6 months? Like, what are you working on that's fresh, that's new, that's different? And I think I was a little bit surprised because there wasn't really a lot of new. Mm-hmm. It was really just, we've been planning for a long time and we're thinking about things and we don't really know what to do. So we're just doing what we've always done. Mm-hmm. And I found a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I would like to share a little scripture because this really struck me. So we were driving back from Traverse City, gorgeous in Traverse City this time of the year. The leaves were absolutely stunning. And this is a scripture reading that I read yesterday. Then Jesus told this parable. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but he didn't find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, for 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Sir, the man replied, leave it alone for 1 more year and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down. So I started to ponder, and maybe as a listener to ponder this, what is the fruit of a church?
I mean, we talk about deeds, like in James, it talks about faith without deeds is dead. So is that, I mean, is it a fair comparison to ask the question, like, what is the fruit of a church versus an individual?
Yeah, so I thought about that, and I was thinking about James as well, because faith without deeds in a lot of churches are known for faith, but not necessarily deeds. Mm-hmm. I think as I started thinking about the fig tree, though, a tree produces fruit not for itself. I think that was the aha for me.
Yeah.
That whatever is going on inside of the tree, what is produced is never for the benefit of the tree itself. Mm-hmm. Like a tree doesn't benefit from any figs or anything, or oranges or apples or whatever it is. I mean, we're in apple season. It's fall right now. Mm-hmm. I know we're time stamping, but it's beautiful, all the trees. But if you think about a tree that's producing fruit, it's always for others to come and enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were talking about this this model analogy, this parable, like a little bit before we started recording. And Josh, he mentioned our producer, he had said like, and a fruit is also used for like the reproduction as well. Like you take it off the tree, and the seeds are then used for more growth and more reproduction, more trees, more fruit to come. And I was like, wow, this is a really interesting model and a really interesting parable. I think that pairs really well with like this Beyond the Breakwater model. Is like, this is in churches today, like this is not used for us. Like the church is not simply for the believers, but for those outside of it.
And then when somebody outside of it benefits from it, oftentimes they go and reach others who don't know Christ, all the people that are in their friends group. I mean, I found it interesting when Jesus called Matthew to be a disciple. Matthew invited him to his home and invited all of his friends, all of the sinners and tax collectors. And that would be like a reproducible fruit.
Yeah. So what are the reproducible fruits of the church?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Let's come back to that. So let me add to this just a little bit. So one of the goals that was brought out at the conference of a strategy for all churches in the state of Michigan was revitalization. And I started to really think about revitalization. And then when I thought about it in light of this context of a fig tree, you can take a fruit tree and you can dig around it, you can make it healthy, you can fertilize it, you can make it look pretty, you can make it look, great mulch. And then I think sometimes I heard this a lot because then people will come. So if we think about that model, then people will what? Come and look at the tree and say, that's a really pretty tree. But if they're coming for fruit and they look at a really pretty tree, it's good for nothing if they're coming for fruit.
But, okay, now I have this argument point of like, okay, but to get the fruit, you have to have like good conditions and nurturing of the tree for there to even be fruit to be produced.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think this is where I think we can really zoom in on is the revitalization that we're doing is the purpose of getting healthy as a church in order to produce fruit for others.
Or is it to be healthy?
Yes. Or is it to be healthy for its own sake, for the believer's sake, to be really, I mean, you could have a really vibrant church that has great worship, great study, great discipleship, great serving, great giving, great everything. But if it all is for the body of believers, and I think this is the tension that we're seeing in a lot of churches, like if we're really healthy, then people will come into our fold and they will become part of us because we are so healthy. But is that really producing fruit? Is it really producing something that those others are benefiting from?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think this, even just in this parable, that's kind of where my vision stopped there was like, oh, okay, when like I see it as like a healthy tree with fruit on it, but I don't see it as the fruit being for a purpose. But it's almost like you get to this picture of like, okay, this is maximum health, is having this tree that is both beautiful and has fruit on it. And so I think like churches don't really know what to do beyond that point, or there hasn't been anything to prompt thought to say, okay, now what? Like we've gotten to this place of health, now what? And so like what causes churches to lose that health, do you think? Like, okay, actually, let's run in like this parable. Like you have a tree with fruit on it. What happens to the fruit if it's not used?
It dies.
Yeah. The fruit
just drops on the ground.
And drops on the ground. Yeah.
And nobody benefits from it.
And then it has to go through the same season of like becoming healthy, dying, and then rebirth in the spring to grow fruit. And it's like that's almost, it seems like this track that churches are on is like maybe becoming healthy, like not doing anything with the health or the fruit of its church. The fruit dies, and then we're back to the same thing again. So what is a slight shift that churches can do to like use the fruit? What is the fruit and how do you use it?
I think it comes down to one really simple thing, is that what is the fruit producing for others outside of itself? I think that's a mindset shift. that would be like, is what we're doing for the benefit of others? Is what we're doing in worship for the benefit of others? Is what we're doing in Bible class for the benefit of others or just the benefit of ourselves? Is what we're doing at the building benefit to others, or is it only to benefit us? And I think it's if we start putting our focus on that fruit, like, God, what do you want us to do for others? How can you use us for the sake of others? How can other people benefit from what we're doing? And I know we've talked about this from a communication standpoint. I mean, you're working on a whole presentation. So walk us through that for just a moment. Because your presentation is about communicating to whom?
To those outside of the church. I mean, there are slight shifts. So, I mean, Ed, you're talking about, we go to this conference every year and we present the Beyond the Breakwater principles. And just this year I thought, like, okay, maybe I make a shift in my own development in leading something on my own. So I'm doing this one about communicating into your community effectively, communicating into the non-believer, the non-church, the unchurched in your community. And that's something I don't think the church has at the forefront of their mind. And I think as you examine your church communications, I mean, think of the different models and modes that you're using. You probably have a bulletin. You might have like a newsletter that goes out, whether it's analog or digital. You might have a bulletin board at your church, a cork board or whatever. You might have signs rolling in your church, signs on the back of the bathroom stalls. And then you think about like, what are the groups or the programs that you have going on? I mean, you have kids ministry, you have Bible studies. Maybe if you're like a little bit more like old school of a church, you have like a quilters group or a baking group. And it's, when you think about the message of who these are all going to, it's the modes of communication are to your church body. It's all internal for internal. But when you make this shift and think like, I need to communicate and like reach into the lives of those who are unchurched or the unbelieving world, that shifts your communication methods to, okay, how do I speak to those outside of it? Where do I need to go? Are there social media groups I need to join? Are there community groups that meet like just business people in the community that I can join and attend? How do I get this to spread word of mouth just beyond my church community? And so there's that shift that it's like you're communicating still, but it's just you have to look at who and what.
So if we use the model of the fig tree, it's really like the fig is producing fruit for itself. If all the communication is for itself, if everything that's doing is for itself, I think eventually that fruit drops.
Yeah.
And people stop eating it. And I think this is why churches are aging, churches are dying, because most of what it does is just for itself. I think it's a whole different mindset, though, when you stop and think about what you just shared. Is the fruit for somebody who's on the outside looking and saying, oh, that's for me. Oh, you did this for me. You want me to enjoy the fruit of the church. Boy, that's a whole shift. Hey, church, we're going to do things that are really not going to benefit us at all. It's really going to benefit others so that they can see that they're the beneficiary of what we're doing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's another part of this, though, this parable.
Where is this you're referencing, by the way?
Luke chapter 13.
Okay.
So this is what Jesus said. For 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Isn't it interesting that Jesus said, I've been coming to look? I mean, I wonder what we would think if we heard Jesus say, I'm coming to your church looking for fruit. And boy, I've been coming back for 3 years and I don't find any. Imagine if Jesus said to the church, cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Boy, think about that. Why should it use up the soil? Why should it consume the resources that I'm giving to the church if it's only using it for itself?
Man, I've never read it in this way.
I never have either. I've never read this in the context of the church, but I think James 2 is really striking me too, because I've never seen James 2 applied to a church. It's always been applied to the individual. You have faith, I have deeds. show me your faith without deeds, I'll show you my faith by my deeds. Perfect. I think we understand that. But now how do you apply that when you add that to the church and you put the church into that and say, you have faith, church. I will show you my faith by my deeds. And I think it goes back to show people, don't tell people. Show people the love of Christ.
Yeah. And I think of like a healthy church, and I think that is important. Like, I think it's important you have to have a healthy tree and healthy soil and have fruit on the tree that is like, it's not rotting. And so like the health of the church is very important. And I think we can come at it from the position of, rather than saying like, oh, it's a bad thing that the church is healthy, stop focusing on the health of the church and do something. Like, I think we can kind of flip the script and say like, it's super awesome that you have focused on the health of your church. And now that you have gotten your church to a place of like health and like you have fruit on the tree, you have people in your church body that are engaged, and the Holy Spirit is working through gifts that he has equipped them with, and he has given the church resources, funding, he has given them a building, he's given them passions and proficiencies. Like, you can use all of those things to then like to go and to start doing something. And so I think that's kind of where this conversation is, why we're having it today.
Yes.
Is like, okay, we're not neglecting the health of the church.
No.
But how can you use your fruit? So maybe like, what are some of the fruits of the church that you're seeing that you would say like, this is a fruit of the church? And how in this parable it says like, I don't want to waste this soil. Like, practically, like, what is a fruit and how can it be used?
Yeah.
Or a
okay.
soil?
If I could, before I answer the question about what's the fruit of the church, let's talk about what you just said, because I think you're really onto something, and it's kind of based on my conversations I just had the last 3 days. I think churches are focusing on health, but that's a good thing. Revitalization, it's a good thing. But then I'm watching this, like this tension, like, okay, now we are healthy for what? So that we can, and that's where the breakdown comes.
Right.
Whereas maybe from the get-go, if the church is going to focus on revitalization, it should be, we're going to focus on revitalization in order to produce fruit for others to enjoy. So somewhere along the way, whether it's at the beginning, like, hey, if we're going to get healthy, we're getting healthy too, or now that we're healthy, it's in order to. And I think I was watching from all the conversations I had, like, in order to, that was where the breakdown came. That everybody was like, but we don't know what to do.
Okay. So it wasn't a matter of there being fear. It was just like, for what? Like, they were missing the what next?
Yes, but I think a lot of fear goes with that. I think you're right. I think there is fear, like, okay, we're healthy so that we can, tell me, what are you doing? What's your first step? And I even heard from a lot of people that have come to us to Beyond the Breakwater and said, we went back and we were really excited in order to, but they struggled with the in order to what? And they couldn't seem to figure that out. And so what they did is, almost out of fear, paralyzing them, they just kind of stayed in a harbor. And boy, I don't know how to stress to pastors and church leaders, what's that first step? That seems paralyzing. See, that's not in my language. So I think I was really in these conversations like, what? Why don't you go meet with the mayor? Why don't you go meet with some community leaders? Why don't you go ask questions? And there just seems to be this, because I don't know what to ask, or I don't know what to say, or I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm asking. And I know we've covered this. How about just what are the unmet needs in the community? And how can the church help meet those needs? There's the fruit. And I don't think we can say there's one kind of fruit.
Yeah.
Because in one community, it might be food.
Right.
In another community, it might be community, the need for community, like young adults. So I'm watching this, like, they're ready, and then it almost seems like they go in reverse. Like, everybody's on the boat. Like, let's use a model. Everybody's like really excited. Okay, let's get on a boat. Let's go. Maybe they even do that. Remember that picture of the boat that goes really close?
to the breakwater and
then turns around and comes back.
Yeah.
I feel like churches are really doing that. They're like, okay, we're ready. Here we go. Mm-hmm. What are we doing? I don't know. Mm-hmm. And they turn around, they're coming back.
Mm-hmm. I think it's because a part of that is because it requires a lot of getting messy. It requires a lot of time. It requires like patience and obedience and a long-lived direction. Like, I think we want to have a solution and just be done with it and go back to our regularly scheduled programs. But I think even in doing like young adult ministry, it's like I'm really excited by the idea of going out and like meeting people who don't know Christ and hearing their heart struggles. And then it's like I meet that person and I still want to be that, like, use me as a means to love them and reach them and show them the heart of God. But then I feel like if I'm being completely honest here, I'm also met with like, this is going to be a long road ahead. And it makes me uncomfortable and it requires me to be vulnerable. And it means I have to like lower some of like my walls to like enter into life with this person and share trust with them. I know it might mean I get a phone call in the middle of the night. And I don't always have to like push past boundaries to like help that person. Like, I think there's a healthy balance there. But all that to say, it's like when you confront what is messy and problematic in the world, it requires
sacrifice.
It requires a lot of sacrifice and stuff that like there's some unknown of like, I don't know what this looks like, and this might mess with my schedule, and it might what space left I did have for margin has now been occupied, and it's going to shift a lot of my routines and my rhythms. And I don't know if if they really want that in their church or in their lives personally, or if they're willing to sacrifice like a program for this one person.
Well, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I don't know if I really want to. I think deep down, I'm not sure the church really wants to be inconvenienced in order to reach one more person who gets to go to heaven. Mm-hmm. I think people feel busy enough. One of the churches that I was visiting with, they have a strategy for moving ahead. Mm-hmm. They're actually going into a place of more rest. And I love the idea. Rest in order to what? Mm-hmm. And that was my question. In order to what? Mm-hmm. You got a big weekend coming up. Mm-hmm. Want to tell us about what the weekend's about?
We are doing like a women's retreat focusing on like sacred rest, sacred mission. And so we're looking at rest from a place of like, I think it's kind of like a buzzword in the church to be like Sabbath, obviously, but like you need more sleep and you need more healthy boundaries and you need to refuel. But like, we're not talking about rest in that sense, but to like come from a position of rest when you begin to do mission, like when you view life and where God has you and who he has you with, it requires a lot of like intentionality and like putting on these glasses that now have a lens of like, my conversation with you looks really different, and I'm going to be inquisitive with where God has me. And with like this young adults group, we made a shift to like, we're just going to hang out. And like, I believe that like the Lord gave us permission to do that, and he will use everyday conversations and connections with people to reveal himself to people. But in my mind, there's a doubt of like, is that enough? But what if what if the numbers aren't there? What if like this fails? And so in that scenario, it's like I need to rest, and that I don't need to strive for the numbers, but I can just be obedient with the mission that God has given me and trust that he will take care of the results. And we're focusing on two passages when it comes to rest this weekend. So one of them is Psalm 33. I would encourage you to go read that. And then Psalm 127. And both of them, so Psalm 33 talks about like, it is not the size of the king's army that wins the battle, or like the strength of the horse that wins the battle. Like, it is the Lord himself. And then Psalm 127 being like, those who labor in vain, like you labor in vain if you don't realize that it is the Lord that builds the house. And so in both of those, I think it carries this rest posture of like, it's not by my own strength, it's not by what I can do or strive for or reach for, but like I'm just showing up with the Lord to build the house and doing the work with him, but he will be the one to like hammer that nail in. He will be the one to give strength to the horse or win the victory. Like it's not our own means that are doing that.
I love the correlation because you just pulled these together beautifully, because you just talked about sacred rest, sacred mission. In order to do the sacred mission, meaning with Christ, you start from a place of rest in order to do the mission. I think this is what we were just talking about earlier in the podcast.
Yeah.
It's easy to say sacred rest. Awesome.
But then what?
Then what?
Yeah.
Or sacred mission, but we're exhausted, we're fatigued,
Right.
we don't have the resources, and we think it's on us. No, rest in him in order to. And I think that's almost like no different than church revitalization. Slow it down in order to speed it up, or in order to do what God would have you to do. And I think what this weekend holds is really, if you took out the sacred mission, boy, it's going to be an amazing, restful time in the Lord. But I love it that you're also coupling with it, like in order to.
Yeah. And
That's the fruit.
It's interesting because when the friend of mine who were doing this together, when we were brainstorming ideas for this retreat, we were talking, I like had mentioned like rest and mission. And she was like, I don't see how those fit together at all. Like, how do you pair the two of them? And I was like, no, like it's a perfect pair. And like, once we started talking about it, she was like, I never have like thought about the connection that the two can have. And like, you're so right that like rest fuels mission. And it also, mission gives purpose to your rest. And so I think they go well together, but I think this is like just our natural compartmentalizing brains is like, we do compartmentalize, we make patterns, we segregate. But when you look at mission and you look at rest and you look at like what it means to follow Christ, it is very fluent across a lot of areas in your life, and it all bleeds together. Like we talk about vocational ministry and doing stuff that is like with like part of your life also fuels into your job too. So I think people can view working for the Lord and serving the Lord in this way that is a lot more fluid than I think we're making it to be.
Yes. If we use the model, and I know we're getting to the time of wrapping it up here. I know we didn't get to the fruit of a church, but I think we've alluded to a lot of that. If we use the model and the boat is going to go beyond the breakwater, and imagine if you had 10 people that are frantically working, racing like crazy in order to get to the boat to race out beyond the breakwater, you're starting in a frenzy. Yeah. And nobody's ready for the journey. Nobody's really ready to be used by God because they're just so wired with everything going on. But imagine if they would come and you'd say, stop. For the next couple of hours, we're going to rest, reflect on the week, prepare our hearts. We're going to get everything ready, and we're going to go onto the boat from a place of rest in order to go beyond the breakwater and mission to God. With God, using his strength and what he's been doing. I think this is perfect. It's a great ending. That's the fruit. I don't think we can speak specifically about the fruit of a church because I think every church is going to have a different fruit. Just like there's no trees that are alike, that are all producing the same fruit. I think God has raised up individual churches to, in their location, in their place. It's whatever the church is doing, and I think I would summarize it this way. Whatever the church is doing, producing fruit for the sake of the community around them, I think it's going to look different in every church. That's the fruit that the church brings.
What can listeners do before they go?
I think rest in order to go on the mission. But I think it's really focusing on, God, what would you have us do? What kind of fruit do you want us to produce for the people in our community that we don't benefit from?
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.